thank you very much for coming to this afternoon session during exams. I know it's been a very long year for all of us, very stressful year. So I just appreciate you making the time. And I'm sure you're very busy schedules. My name is Thomas King. I am a learning designer in the Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Nadine Hammond, who is in fact kind of my boss, one of my bosses, who's joining us from George. Nadine will be active in the chat and will be there to field any questions that come up, although with such a small group today, we can probably just pipe up when you need to. And of course, we have Max in the background. Thank you so much, Max, for doing all the organizational work. Always respect your administrators. Okay, let's get started and talking about the content tool in Amathuba. So today we're going to be covering the following topics. We're going to be talking about the purpose and function of the content tool. We'll be comparing the content tool to its equivalents in Vula, which are the resources and lessons tools, rough equivalents. Yes, Nadine just puts a comment in the chat for you to read as well. We're going to be talking about how to develop instructional text in the tool and talking about some of the templates we've offered or provided for that. We'll be talking about the ways that Amathuba wants to organize and chunk content and build learning pathways. And we're going to briefly mention some of the other tools that can be added into content as well. If we have time, which I think we will today, we will also talk about some of the more advanced features of the actual tool. What we're not specifically covering in today's session is kind of all the other aspects of Amathuba as a platform. So assignments, quizzes, and discussions, grading, the various supplementary tools like surveys and checklists, Padlets, course communications, and so forth. Those will be covered in future meetings. I do believe that one person who signed up today would like to know about assignments. I think that's Zintle. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
Zintle, did you ask about creating assignments in today's session?
Yes. Well, that's what I wrote when I was signing up.
Yeah.
Is this what the session is about?
Not specifically, no, but if we have time at the end, maybe we can mention it, or you can stay on the call and we can just chat about it afterwards, if that's okay.
No problem. You don't have to even make it a
no.
priority. I will learn whatever is there to learn.
Sure thing, but we are here to help.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Before we get started with the specific tool, we're just going to talk about order migration. So as I hope you've been made aware, UCT will be migrating from Vula to Amathuba over the next few years in a staggered migration process. Currently, we are moving all of the courses that will launch at a first year level in February. So that is the F courses, the H courses, the W courses, and all the specialist courses which students need access to, the first year students need access to in February. During next year, we will then also be migrating the second semester courses for first years, and probably start on the second and third year courses as well. So the long tail is we are either going to be migrating year by year, so all first years for next year, and second years the year before, third years the year before that, I mean after that, or we might speed that up a little bit and try and move the courses across a little bit faster. But right now we are focusing on first year courses and the various kinds of support courses that first years need access to. The migration process is done with the aid of a learning designer, like myself. So if you are teaching or convening really, a first year course next year, please make sure that you have contacted your learning designer who will be able to help you in migrating your course, tell you about some of the common pitfalls, tell you about the auto migration process. So a lot of the process is handled by machine, like all assignments get moved across, all quizzes get moved across, discussions get moved across, etc. And you won't have to manually rebuild these things, but you do need to check them, and in many cases do a bit of rearranging, reorganization, translating from the one platform to the other, because they're not identical. So the words all move, but sometimes you need to adjust the grammar to have it make sense in the new platform. Okay. Now, starting off with content is a bit of a weird thing, because when we do training with people, we actually generally recommend that content's probably the last thing, the last tool you build. And the approach that we call we call a foundation first build. This foundation first build means you start at the back of your course, the kind of the things that are foundational to your course rather than students necessarily see. So you start off by organizing your grades. You get your course outline, open it, and then say, okay, what kind of things are going to be graded in my course, and how do I want to use the grades tool? Likewise, the next step, you set up your groups. So if I'm going to be developing tutorial groups, I would set them up beforehand. If I'm going to be splitting the class into groups of 5, I can set all that infrastructure up before I start even thinking about assignments and those kinds of things. And for those people who use rubrics, you'd also set up your rubrics at this point. Then you would move over to your activities, and these are already your assessed activities, things that students do and can get marked for. The 3 big tools there being your assignments, quizzes, and discussion tools, which are very, very similar to your VULA assignments, tests and quizzes, and discussions tools. And you can see there's lines between them that your assignments tool, for example, can draw from groups. In other words, you can set up group assignments or group discussions. Likewise, rubrics can apply to assignments or discussions, and grades can apply to all 3. So you would set up those backend, then you set up your assignments, your assessment type activities, and then you come to content, which is the tool that profiles your learning materials, your lecture videos, your PowerPoints, your PDFs, links to external websites, YouTube videos, etc. And can optionally also bring in other tools like your assignments, your quizzes, discussions, Padlets, Gradescope, Leganto, other third-party tools, and the kind of supplementary tools that are things like surveys for electing class presidents or setting up a course evaluation, or the optional self-assessment, which is like an unmarked quiz. So while we're going to be talking about content today, the recommended approach, and this recommended approach does kind of assume that you have a bit of time to prep. And I know I've been at UCT for a while now, and I think the last time I felt comfortable at UCT and having time to plan for the future was about 2013. But while we're talking about content today, the ideal build is actually come to this tool at the very end of building your course site. Nevertheless, we are going to continue talking about it. Okay, before I move on, are there any big questions or comments people would like to discuss? Perhaps about migration, about this foundation first build approach? Anything at all? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, cool. Let's talk about content. Okay, what is the content tool? The content tool fundamentally is a place to organize various different learning materials and optionally also course activities into a single place. A very straightforward, basic, elementary, but perfectly functional way of using the content tool is purely as a learning material or learning resource storage and organization space. Very much like, in fact, identical to really, the resources tool on VULA. So you can use content as a place to store your files, and also links out to things like YouTube videos, or you can even embed an entire website if they've set it up correctly on their end. This approach then really is just mimicking the resources folder in VULA. So you create a set of folders and subfolders, and you would drag and drop your learning materials in there, or link outwards to YouTube videos, for example. In terms of the terminology that's used in the content tool, there are 3 levels. At the top, these dark blue boxes on the right-hand side over here, you have your units, which are these dark blue boxes. Underneath units, you have lessons, which are these darker gray ones. And underneath those, you have these paler gray ones, which are called folders. Now, fundamentally, these are just top level folder, subfolder level 1, subfolder level 2. They're just storage the different boxes. There's sets of nested boxes, essentially, within one another. Hi, Shanali. Thanks for joining us. So, for example, over here, we have a unit called course materials. Under this unit, we have a lesson called readings, which has underneath that 2 folders called week 1 and week 2. And under those weeks, we have various kinds of resources, in this case, PDF. I'm just going to quit this for a second and I'll show you that course. Am I still showing my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Let me just zoom in a little bit. Okay, so on this demo course over here, we have our units, these dark blue things. And under those units, we have lessons. And under these lessons, we have various readings in PDF. Under this one, we have some links out to, in this instance, when it loads, an actual website which is embedded into the content tool. So this is just the website. You click through it and it'll take you to, the next page of the website. Or in this instance, we have, in fact, a link to a YouTube video. No, sorry, this is a crime thing. Which one has the YouTube video? Over here. Over here, we have another unit called videos. And here we have, for example, an embedded YouTube video, or a link out to YouTube video as kind of you prefer, whichever one you want. And over here, we have some embedded websites. Very straightforward. This is essentially just a resources tool. Perfectly adequate way of using the tool. This would be very appropriate, for instance, if you have a very face-to-face course that you want this tool just to store readings, and you will be building the connections between these readings or discussing how students should access these readings in a face-to-face context. So I walk into my lecture theatre, I am lecturing to my students, standard lecture. And after the lecture, I say, okay, students, thanks for coming. I'll be uploading my PowerPoints to the week 1 folder. Also in that folder, there is a YouTube video that you should check out on this topic. And I've put in some supplementary readings in the subfolder that you can go through at your own leisure. Please be prepared to have read some of these for your tutorial tomorrow or Wednesday or whatever the day is. Very, very straightforward, simple, very easy to organize. In that manner, how I would go about constructing this is I would navigate to my content tool in Amathuba. I would click new unit to create a new one of these top level units. I'm just going to name this after today's date. So 2 November. And at the bottom here, you can see I can leave this hidden or make it visible as needed. Thank you, Shanali. Melissa, you had a hand up.
Hey, thanks. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun, but I just wanted to ask you. So I develop use our coursework using authoring software. So I wanted to find out in the lessons tool, is there a drag and drop for our SCORM package there? Because I know in the past, obviously Vila wasn't SCORM compliant. So we had to create sort of ghost sites, and it was quite a rigmarole, but we've been doing it that way for so long. So I was kind of hoping, I was like crossing fingers that we just be able to drag and drop the SCORM packages into the lessons tab on Amathuba. Is that possible?
There is a SCORM compliancy, but I think this is something that maybe should be talked to with a learning designer or a specialist. What software were you using to build the course before?
No, so I'm using Storyline. We're using Storyline 3.
Storyline, okay.
Yeah, so basically what I did in the past was we created a ghost site just for the transferring of all the files. Because obviously when you publish in Storyline, you can publish to LMS, otherwise you can just export your SCORM. And then, normally like on other LMSs like Moodle or even Blackboard, whatever, you can just drag and drop your SCORM. So I was really hoping that was a functionality on Amathuba, which would be really cool. My course code, so I actually convene a postgraduate diploma in TB HIV management. I've got 4 courses that make it up. So I'll pop that in the chat, and yeah, maybe you guys could get back to me on that. It would be so cool if it's embedded, you know, if it was so organically, it's so much more organic if it just sort of like opens up in the LMS itself. Otherwise, what happens is it actually opens up a new tab currently, and students have to come back to Vila and refresh everything with prerequisites. So yeah, it would be awesome. But I'll pop those course codes in the chat now.
Yeah, that sounds like a possibility, but it's something that's probably going to take a little bit longer for us to just do some investigation and then get back to you about that. Yeah. Okay, cool. So to keep going, units tab, you can choose to make visible or visible when you're ready, and save and close when you are done. You will notice that over here, there are a range of different functions. So this is like the standard rich text editor, which is available on almost all the tools within Amathuba. You know, like announcements, when you're setting up an assignment, you have access to this. Opinions differ, but my recommendation is to leave these blank and to use these kind of simply. Fantastic. Thank you, Melissa. We'll take a look at those sites and get back to you. Ooh, Q codes. That's interesting.
Awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, like I said, opinions differ, but particularly if you're using these as essentially folders, my advice is you'd leave that space blank. And then underneath these, we can create those subfolders or lessons and folders by clicking on the Create New button, New Lesson, which you notice will bring up almost exactly the same kind of array. So we're just going to call this folder 1. Like so. And underneath that, you can create another level. They call them folders, but they're the same thing. They're just different levels of materials, or start adding materials into there. So using the add existing function, I can browse from my PC and upload. Let's try and get something a little bit smaller. That and that into my content structure. And there are files. That is in fact one of my own financial statements, which I really shouldn't have uploaded, but over here we have an audio clip that was a PDF like those readings that we had previously. You'll notice that as you create things, everything is hidden by default. So you will just need to unhide things when you are ready to share them with your students. If you hide a top level thing, for instance, this folder, if that's hidden, everything underneath it will be hidden, even if this one, for instance, says it's visible. So once you have organized things, you can always create a folder, for example, for other lecturers. That will be visible to lecturers, but it won't be visible to your students, where you could store various kinds of resources here. Yeah, Melissa, it almost certainly does. Alternatively, there are going to be places where we could look at refining our auto migration process. So we will get in contact with you about that kind of more specific thing, but I'm sure we will be able to accommodate you. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's pretty cool. The migration's doing pretty well. Okay. That is essentially content as resources. The most important thing to think about here is the amount of levels you can go down. So Amathuba as a platform, there are only 3 levels of folders. You have your units, you have your lessons, and underneath those are folders. So if you had a very, very deep resources folder and you want to migrate that across, there will be some work needed to flatten that hierarchy a bit. It is a bit restrictive, but honestly, it's actually probably for the best, because having worked on hundreds of sites before, after a certain level of folder complexity, you start losing students, or ancient resources from sometimes even 10 years ago start resurfacing in places because there has been no good folder management. So something to bear in mind, that there are only 3 levels of folders, and you may need to do a little bit of reshuffling of your files to make them appear in the content tool. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, and as mentioned, this is very appropriate for sites which are going to be doing mostly or kind of exclusively face-to-face and really just want a place to store files. Okay, Michelle's got a question. When the courses are migrated, will they migrate so it's hidden from the students until we release each week themselves? No, Michelle, but hiding is incredibly easy. Once I'm migrated, I just need to hide my units like so, or unhide them when I'm ready to do so. So it is far, far easier to make things visible and invisible in Amathuba than it was in Voodoo, which could be a bit of a process. You just simply need to click your visibility icon on the folder level or right down onto the file level if you need to get very precise with that. While I'm here, actually, if I ever need to reorganize content, so for example, if this was actually a reading, but I put it on, a module 1 reading, but I put it onto module 2, I simply hover over these 8 little dots and drag and drop my files into position. And likewise, entire folders, I can just drag and drop those to where they need to go. So very, very easy to reorganize content within the system, within folders, or even move them between folders as need be. Okay. So that is content as resources. To add various items we discussed, you would click either on Create New, if we are, for instance, creating those subfolders, or add existing if we are acquiring files from our desktops, if we're making new things, or if we wanted to add, for instance, links to YouTube. So the full range of add existing, the primary one is down here in the bottom, the drag and drop. So drag and dropping things from your PC or browsing, of course, your folder structure to add one or many files into your system. As I showed before, you can select a number of files and upload them together as a bundle. There are a range of other things you can also add here, which we'll be discussing more in a moment. So if you have already created an assignment, a discussion, or a quiz, you can also put those into your content structure, or checklists, grade scope, Leganto reading lists, Padlets that you've made in Padlet already, etc. The ones that you would use the create new function are for, as mentioned, those folders and subfolders, HTML documents, which we'll get to in a little bit, or you can even go and create new assignments, new discussions, new quizzes, or new checklists. Although we would not recommend you do that in here. Like I said, with the foundation first approach, we recommend you rather build those beforehand in their appropriate tools and use add existing to link them into your content structure if you so desire. The reason we suggest that is it's a good idea to have planned things out and to have labeled and named everything really thoroughly beforehand. Make sure it's associated with the gradebook if you're using the gradebook, making sure, for example, Turnitin's been enabled properly, that you've got a rubric attached if you're using rubrics. So it's best to build the back end of your course first and you come to content at the end to bring it all together, in which case you're pretty much just using this add existing button, except if you need to make some new subfolders. Okay, well, we've already done that demonstration. Okay, so let's go to a question. Perhaps a question, migration purely for archival? No. Okay, let's briefly talk about migration. So the migration process, when it comes to your course, there's a two-stage process. Quite soon, I'm not sure of the precise date, but we will have an auto migration button that you can add to your Voodoo site. Click it and say, I want to migrate my site to Amathuba. The migration will go to a reference site, which looks, I'll just get like one of these, which you can also see just gives a date. These sites are archives. They're there to store the material. They're not supposed to be touched after this point. They do not have students added to them. They're not published. They are invisible. They are there for a reference. And also just to track for our own internal purposes that migration is going well. So every time we migrate, we improve the process a little bit, and these sites become more and more like Voodoo. In fact, they're already pretty much toasted. your actual course site, let's just get, you can see like it will be named something like this, you know, the course code, the name of the course, and nothing of this Vula reference site. This course, the first thing we do with that, once the site's been migrated, is we open it up, go into our course admin, and we import everything from that reference site. Like how you couldn't do in Vula, where you could import from site, you can do the same process in Amathuba. You can import components from one site into another. The process is, however, much more fine-grained than it was in Vula. Vula, you'd have to pull like all the assignments across, or all the lessons pages. Over here, once you've searched and selected the course you want, you can either copy everything across, or you can go and select specific components. Like I just want to pull, thank you, the files across, or I want to pull all the discussions across, or I want to pull the grade items, or I want to pull some of the announcements from one side to another. So the migration, although it creates two sites for you, all the material will be on both sites, and your live course site then will be the one that you go and edit and change. And when 2024 rolls around, you will just import from the 2023 site and make the necessary adjustments. So you don't need to build your sites from scratch. You would just be importing from the previous year's iteration, unless it's changed radically and you need to actually build from scratch from the first place. I hope that answers your question, Melissa.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I think it's, you know, we're in a kind of like a unique situation in that we don't build content directly onto the LMS. So
yeah,
we edit our content annually with specialists that work with the authoring via the authoring software. So never actually historically ever duplicated a site, not in the, you know, 8 years that I've been doing this. I've always built a completely brand new online classroom every single time that course is delivered, and I change graphics and I change, you know, so just there's a different feel to it every year. So it's interesting because I actually prefer to just work from a clean blank slate for every course, but it's to know about the reference site, because very often if a student poses a question about something that happened last year and feedback they got, and they say they didn't get feedback, it's very useful to go back onto Vula. I've got about 30 million sites on to go back, and I can say, okay, I can see exactly what your lecturer said.
yes.
Good to know that reference site is going to be there, so that all of my courses will be backed up, but that I don't necessarily have to migrate the course itself and work from that. I can actually just create sort of like a bespoke kind of online classroom for every course, right? So
yes, absolutely.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's very interesting. Thanks.
Yeah, this process entirely, you know, this is the recommended approach, but honestly, I think my most recommended would be building from scratch each time, because then you really get to learn the platform. But I think your case is quite unique. Love to chat with you about it sometime, though, to just see the process and see how best we can help. Yeah.
Cool, that'd be great.
Fantastic. Cool. Okay. Back to the presentation. The second way of using the content tool is like the lessons tool in Vula. So for those of you who attended the lessons webinars we've been running over the past few years, lessons is a place to gather various learning objects, videos, readings, etc., scaffold them with instructional text. So to say, okay, for the next 3 readings, you need to focus on concepts A, B, and C, or you need to watch the first 15 minutes of the video. That's the important part. Or read chapters 1, 2, and 3 of this PDF. And perhaps pose some supportive questions, like, when reading this question, ask yourself, how is the author doing X, Y, or Z? So that's scaffolding with instructional text, as we call that information that we are building around those resources, and also linking to things like the relevant assignment for that module or week or semester, or whatever it is, or a quiz that relates to that section of content, or discussion that relates to that piece of material. Likewise, the content tool in Amathuba can perform exactly the same function. So we would add our resources into some kind of structure and structure them with those lessons and folders, which are, once again, they're just different names for subfolders, but also put in links to the actual relevant quiz, or a checklist that students should be ticking off as they move through it, or a quick self-assessment activity that they should take just to check their own knowledge, or the link to the specific discussion relevant to that specific module or piece of work. This approach strongly lends to, please let me exit, thank you, rather than here where we have our units are essentially descriptors of a type of resource, like readings or podcasts or videos, instead thinking of your units as modules. We default to saying a module is 1 week. That is absolutely not applicable for all courses, but it's a pretty robust system. So if you have, a semester-long course, you'd have 13 weeks equals 13 units. Many courses will have only, 10 things because weeks 11 to 13 are all spent on the same topic, or however you want to organize it. That's entirely up to you. But here you can see we have our week 1, which is around Earth. We have topic 1, which has some resources, PDFs in this instance, and some specific lecture videos also related to that topic 1. When it loads. And there's our lecture videos, along with some other materials that they've provided in this topic 1. And that is scaffolded with this instructional text, leading us in and telling us how we should engage with the work. So we've got some key information. We've got an introduction to this week 1. We've got some information about where the lectures will be, where the practicals will be, and some study tips, and so on and so forth. And a link to the specific discussion forum for the Q&A for week 1 and the specific week 1 test. So not just resources, which are contained in here, but also the learning activities, a discussion and a quiz in this instance, and instructional text telling us how to engage with that content. See, there's a question in the chat. Melissa, yes, in fact, prerequisites are way, way better in Amathuba than they were in Vula. It's like night and day. We'll cover that, yeah. Prerequisites were frankly awful in Vula. I mean, they worked, but they were easy to break. Much, much more straightforward in Amathuba. Yeah, but I'll cover that at the end in the kind of more advanced section. There are a range of different ways you can use this. So over here, for example, we've got an introductory module, which has some information about the course. We have weekly lessons. They put all their lessons into one unit and used lessons for the different weeks, and so forth. And they've got some introductory information about the lessons in general. So a range of different approaches people take to how they would organize this tool. But in all of these instances, and we'll stick with this one, they've gathered the materials and scaffolded them with information about the week and with the specific learning activities for said week. The way of doing that, I'll go back to our demonstration course here, is we have created our unit. We've added our folder with our resources for said unit. And now what we're going to do is we're going to create an HTML document. It's a horrible name, but it's good functionality. You'll see this looks almost exactly like those unit and lesson folder pages that we've made before. In this case, we're just going to call it introduction or introduction to the week. We have that same rich text editor that have been in previous ones, but we also have a number of pre-built templates that you can use to structure your content. For instance, a module introductory template, which has some set text on it, or a basic page template, which just has a header, some text headings, and a footer, or some more advanced features like an accordion, which has drop downs. I'll show you an example of I'll just use this one afterwards, or tabs, which has like horizontal tabs. So let's just use this quickly. These are all, when you select a template, you're basically just copying a whole bunch of text or HTML from one into another. So that's why it asks you when you select a new template, do you want to replace everything on the page with that template? So if you would like to use templates, please use them before you start adding content. And once you do add content, it's just delete and replace. And here is our HTML page. You can see here we have the different tabs, and I don't know why it's not functioning. Oh, because I put nothing in the separate one. Yeah. Let's switch over to our self-paced training site very quickly. The self-paced training site, by the way, you will all have access to it already. All UCT staff have access to it. And this has information on all the different tools in Amathuba, from the migration process itself, to specific information about building a site, to specific information on each of the different tools. For instance, the content tool that we'll be discussing today. It has screenshots. There will be a text guide and a video guide for most tools. And here we can see the use of that tabs function. In this case, it gives you 3 different scenarios with someone using it, but it might be video over here, question about the video over here, answers about the video over here. So a couple of different formats and structures you could use to sort of play around with. Okay. These HTML documents then are your instructional text for the resources to come. If you want to ever edit, you can go in there and edit said thing. And here once again, we're going to just start putting in some text, or we can get really fancy and start linking, for instance, to quick linking to specific discussions, which just gives us a link in the text. So you can actually use this like very much like a lessons tool, where you're just linking out to things that you've already created. Or you can have them as, by using the add existing function, separate items within your content structure, like so. This approach, where we are taking these different things, your readings, your quizzes, and putting them into your content structure, is the recommended approach. It's Amathuba's native grammar, if you like to think of it that way. The reason being is here you can see we can get very fine-grained with hiding and unhiding things. It's very straightforward, readjusting things into our structure. And this ties into the various analytics tools that we won't have time to talk about in today's session, but that you can get quite fine-grained analytics on, for example, who has accessed this introduction to week 1 page, which of your students have accessed this, or who has gone through all of the videos, if they are like this in separate content items. You don't have to approach your site that way. I'm just going to very quickly show you a different approach entirely. And this is a music site that I'm currently working on. So this site, just find a relevant page. Here we go. This site uses just HTML documents, and on these documents, it has embedded the video. And the reason being for this one is that they have very extensive instructional text with like very specific, listen to this video, and then they have a video or short video clip, another video like so. And having this whole bunch of videos in content with a single page for this, they didn't feel like was appropriate for their pedagogy. Once again, with all of these things, please talk to your learning designer. They can give you the different approaches, how to build these different kinds of sites. But the native language of the system is units, store and organize content and associated activities using HTML pages to provide instructional text for those sets of activities. It's also the fastest and easiest way to build a site. Is you have your units to structure bundles of content, whether that's organized weekly or by theme or whatever, and then optionally also adding in your learning activities, which I mentioned can be your assignments, discussions, quizzes. They can be checklists. They can be links to things like Padlets or Leganto, or a range of other activities like opencast videos and so on and so forth. Surveys, for example, for class polls. Any questions at this point? 5, 4. Are there any hands up in the chat that I can't see? 3, 2, 1. Okay, great. So as mentioned, we can think about lessons as, content as resources, or we can think about content as lessons. You're building learning pathways between a number of different learning activities, learning materials, with associated assignments, surveys, polls, quizzes, etc. Very much like how you would use the lessons tool in Vula. This is the full range of items. I'll send this presentation out to you at the end of the session as well. That can be used in your content, added as content items. And in future, we will also be experimenting with other tools that the service provider is called Brightspace, like the service provider for Vula was called Sakai. They may have other kinds of third-party tools or learning activities that we can add also. At the moment, we're keeping it a little bit more restrictive, just to make sure people don't go a bit too wild with the different things that are offered. We've discussed HTML documents. HTML documents are where you would provide that guiding information to help your students move through the content. One thing I didn't mention about the templates, by the way, is you can also build your own template and then reuse that. So if you don't like our header images, or you want all your headings to be red instead of blue, you can make your own HTML document, save that as a template, and then just reuse that going forward. If you would like to find out about how to build your own template, please contact your learning designer. Okay, we have spoken also about chunking content. So that chunking content as in having pieces of content as their own individual learning items. It's like, as I said, it's Amathuba's native grammar. It's designed way of doing things. It ties in very well to the various analytics and tracking tools. Also, what's called release conditions, which is, in Melissa's case, that same thing as prerequisites. And we'll show that in a moment. It also displays very well on mobile. And there is a Brightspace, which is once again the service provider for Amathuba, Brightspace Pulse app, which students can use to access their courses on mobile. And using this chunked approach where things are their own separate item within content works very nicely for the mobile app. So it's a bit of a design change, but it's one which works very nicely with all the other different functions in Amathuba, particularly the more advanced ones. We've spoken about hiding and unhiding content and moving content. If you need to replace a file, and this is really for kind of years to come, but if I needed to replace this with an updated version, I can go in here, I can edit this, and over there, just replace that file directly. It just means that everything is tied into the same location. You don't need to find a new version. You just swap it out with a more recent file. Other functions in this three little dots. You can download these contents. If they're PDF, you can't download videos. You can delete. Notice there are two separate delete functions here. Not a problem, Shanali. Good luck for training. You can delete this by just removing it. So what that will do, let's go into our new module. If I delete by removing, it just takes it out of the structure, but the actual file itself still lives in the back end of the course, in a kind of like a hidden archive thing. So if you delete something by mistake, you can contact us to help get it back. So that is the recommended approach. When you're deleting things out of content, delete by using this remove the topic rather than this thing, which will go and actually delete the whole thing. So if this quiz, it'll delete it from the quiz tool as well. It'll take out there, like, it just takes this out of your site entirely. Rather use this remove, because then that activity or file or whatever still exists in the backend, and we can help you restore that, or you can re-add it yourself. For instance, if that was a quiz you deleted, then we just go and add existing, find that quiz, and reattach it into our content. Okay. Any questions at this point? 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, cool. Let's talk about some of the more advanced features. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it in this view if you don't mind. I don't like switching between the slideshow. We have talked about importing from other sites. So you can import very, very fine-grained materials from other sites. So I can import just the assignments from another site, or I can import all the question pools from one site into another site. I can import a specific content unit. So I can import this unit on interesting podcasts and the associated links without importing the whole content tool. Was that someone unmuting? No, okay. And that import export function is you go to manage course, course admin, import export copy components, and then you would search for the package that you want. Search for the site that you want. You need to be available on both sites, of course, and then import, for instance, all the surveys that you're using for class rep, or all the files, or all the assignments from one site into another. And of course, this is also how you would duplicate a site. Is the new site gets created, you just import all the content from the previous site. Melissa's big question about prerequisites. I'm probably going to be talking to you, Melissa, because it's a very underused tool in Vula, because it's kind of clumsy. Would you like to just explain how you used it in your site?
Yeah, sure. So we, obviously the nature of the PG DIP is what's intended for doctors and nurses across Africa. And so the content is, you don't have random access, because it's sort of like, the idea is that there's a golden thread and there's a lot of and management algorithms. And so you kind of like, you can't, we sort of deal with one section of work at a time, and the one thing is built on from the other. And so that's how we achieve what we feel is a holistic learning pathway. But
yes.
We've set up prerequisites. We've always done it that way, and so that students don't have that random access. Also, because the content needs to be quality assured from one year to the next, because Department of Health guidelines change annually. So treatment algorithm might change, and we have to update all of our content based around that update. So yes, prerequisites were really important for us, put it that way. So what we normally do, the way that we've done it in the past, is normally students start off with a pre-assessment, which is that little test your knowledge sort of before they begin. They don't get any feedback on that. And then the exact same questions are used as for the post-assessment, and then they get a grade for that, and they can check the feedback. So there's a pre, and then there are multiple study sessions, which are their lessons. That's what they click on, and it opens up in a new tab. There are also some self-assessments that we embed within that content as well. Then they have their post-assessment, and normally a blog activity. And that's only when they've finished that chunk of work can they start with the next section of work. So yeah, sort of in a nutshell, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, cool. So the equivalent of prerequisites in Amathuba is something called release conditions. Think of it, this item is released upon condition that. So release conditions aren't a separate tool. They're not on this bar. They're not under the course admin. They are a function which applies to pretty much anything that can be added as a content item. So I can attach those to a whole unit. I can attach release condition to a specific page. I can attach it to, go away, an assignment, a discussion, a quiz, a checklist, or even a specific item on a checklist, and so on. Not so much your external tools. It has to be a tool that lives inside thing. But you can very straightforwardly, everything that you described now, absolutely. So you could use completion of an assignment as a release condition. You could use getting a certain mark on a quiz as a release condition. You could say access is a release condition. So I'm not going to release this folder called readings until I know students have read the course outline. That could be a release condition. To do so is we go to the item that we want hidden. So let's say, well, let's use an example from one that we already have existing. Yeah, here we go. Over here, this course orientation module, you'll see has this little wheel, release conditions are met. And over here, it's visible if conditions have been met. So we can go and check the release conditions for this unit. And the release conditions for this unit are, there's two of them. They have to have completed the Memorandum of Understanding checklist and the Honor Pledge checklist, which exist over here. There's that Memorandum of Understanding, and here's the Honor Pledge. So this piece of material, this whole unit, is hidden until students have completed both of these checklists. There are a range of other functions. No problem, Michelle. Have an awesome afternoon. There are a huge range of different things you can make into a prerequisite, into a release condition. So you can say, release this on condition someone has submitted to a particular assignment or not submitted to a particular assignment, completed a checklist, are part of a specific group, have visited a particular item within content. So that's like read one of those HTML documents, has received a specific grade or even on a rubric, has posted in a particular topic, has achieved a specific score on a quiz, or has at least attempted a quiz or completed a survey. You can also chain those together. So as we saw here, this one has two conditions. It's completed this particular checklist and this checklist. And you can say all or any. So you could have, for example, a remedial unit, a whole unit's worth of content, which is accessible only to students who get less than 50% of the quiz, or have ticked a checklist says, I want access to the remedial content even though I've passed the quiz. Yeah, and that's how you would set up release conditions within, yeah, you can get incredibly specific. So prerequisites in Fuller, for those who don't know, was one giant chain. Students have to have done every single thing in that chain before they get access to the next thing, which also meant that if you added a new one in halfway through, that could break your entire system and half your students suddenly are locked out of content they could access yesterday. So much more fine-grained with release conditions within Amathuba. Some examples. So what this course has done is you can see they have locked off all of the lessons and the course orientation until students have at least ticked, I have gone through the Memorandum of Understanding and I've completed my Honor Pledge. They can't access the rest of the course until they've done those things. Another course we have, it's a postgraduate course in psychology. There are 8 electives on the course, each with its own unit and each with its own assignments and discussions and quizzes. Students in the beginning sign up to 3 of those by basically allocating themselves into the appropriate groups, and then they only see those 3 units for their particular electives, and they only see the assignments attached to those particular electives, and they only see the quizzes and discussions for those particular electives. So you actually have this huge range of material, but the students only see the materials that they need access to. So once again, so when we chat to you about your migration, we can help you set up the release conditions that are appropriate to your course. You are an experienced user of prerequisites, so you know they can be a bit finicky. The same applies in release conditions in Amathuba. It's best to use them as sparingly as you can, but you can definitely make very complicated sets of things, but always best to. Also, I would always recommend not attaching it to like have read something, but rather a student activity, even if that's just ticking a checklist. The best, of course, is if they've submitted an assignment, or they've got a specific grade, or they have posted in a discussion forum, or have taken a quiz. So something that requires active student engagement. Okay. Our last thing for today. Okay, we discussed, yeah. So release conditions will serve that function for you. we are pretty much at the end of our today's session. So in summary, what is the content tool? The content tool is ideally what you come to at the end of your system after you have built your learning materials. We've gathered your learning materials on your PC together. You have at least drafted your assessments and discussions and quizzes. You don't have to finalize them. Created any surveys or checklists that you want. And then you bring those all together. If it's just your learning materials, you'd use it like resources. If you're building learning pathways, you bring all this content together into a unit structure subdivided into folders. Put your checklists in, put your assignments into the relative place, and scaffold that with instructional text through the HTML document function. You can get really complicated using release conditions to make guided learning pathways or even branching learning pathways if you need to. And that content tool ties in with the analytics tools that will be discussed in further webinars. In terms of further support, so I would just like you to, when you are on Amathuba, to visit the Amathuba self-paced training site. As mentioned before, this takes you through what Amathuba is, the migrating process for your content, the tool guides on each specific tool. So all the way from your class list and your groups to things like announcements, the calendar, intelligent agents, surveys, and so forth. And you'll see I'm a lecturer on this. You will all be students. We will also be adding things like guides for using Padlet and Gradescope and stuff once we have got those things finalized, hopefully by the end of this year. Other support channels, you can always contact us. The same support channels will still redirect, so SILT Help Desk or Help at Fuller, they both redirect to the same place with specific queries, or you can book a consultation through the SILT website, where we can sit, look at your course and discuss specific things with you, such as I have a problem with my online assessments that I want you to help, or I'm having trouble enabling Turnitin from my assignments. So those consultation sessions, we can work with your actual specific content and your specific learning needs to develop a strategy or way of going forward. Mercy, got a question about blogs or forums. There is a blogging tool in Amathuba. Honestly, it's not very great, and I don't think it provides any real functionality that the discussions tool doesn't. But this is something we can discuss when it comes time to migrate your course. Yeah, we would generally recommend discussions, but we can add a blogging tool to your site if needed, or we can look at you incorporating a different tool, which could even be something like Google Docs, and embed those into your structure. Or Padlet makes actually quite a nice blogging tool because you can use multimedia there. So there is a blogs tool but at the moment we don't like it very much. It doesn't look very nice, and we can add it if needs be, or we can find an alternative for you using a different tool.
Thanks so much, because I think like blogs are a pause to reflect, right? So it's more like a diary entry, and it's not graded, but it forms part of our hours of online participation, which is part of our course syllabus. Students have to apply a 5. So blogs are that pause to reflect. It just gives them that time to reflect on what they've learned in each section of work, whereas obviously forums are completely different. So the activity type is completely different. So for our hours and how we break up the waiting for the 5 hours, blogs are one thing and discussion forums are another. So it would be really awesome. But yeah, Padlet's a good idea. Maybe that's something we can use going forward.
Yeah, the where the activity takes place, yeah, it depends on, if you're very rigorous, that we're using discussion forums for this. But you could always open up a discussion forum for the blogs. That really depends on what your preferences are, how fine-grained you need to get with it. But something I just don't like the blogs tool in Amathuba. I think it's gross. But we will be able to definitely find a function that will work for you, which will serve for your learning, even if it's not called blogs, but it's called something else. Okay, folks, we are at 2 o'clock. Please, once again, feel free to chat to us at any point. At the moment, we are focusing on that first-year migration. It is several hundred courses and a lot more support sites. So we may not have time to discuss things like second-year course migration with you just yet. Also, as we improve our understanding of the platform and add new functionality, the training we offer for second years might be quite different than we're currently offering. So focusing on first year migration at the moment, we may not be able to support other kinds of migration just yet, but we will be in the following years. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us via those support channels. Check out the self-paced training site just to look at the different tools and follow our video guides, and book a consultation with us if you need any specific support. Thank you very much for coming. Have a lovely rainy afternoon if you're based in Cape Town like I am, and best of luck for the rest of the year.